Today, I'm going to share with you why I think this is the case. ELT in rural area, the default mode is crisis. Problems with ELT in rural area is first, English here is a foreign language, so we have low to zero exposure of English out of classroom setting. Students would have low motivation in learning English too because they perceive English is just another compulsory subject to pass. And I have to say the passing grade is pretty low. And they can trick this. They can join several remedial class sessions, retake the test once or twice, and eventually as a subject, they will pass English without having to acquire the language in the real sense of language acquisition. So we are learning English in acquisition for environment, where the norm is not having to acquire the language at all. Another norm is this traditional life cycle. Students perceive that they need only graduate vocational school or high school and go for the real life work options they have in industrial compound or work as hard laborers, get married and have kids. This is reflected from the fact that probably only less than 3% of the graduates from my SMP, the middle school where I teach, end up studying in university level. It's probably because they can't afford university study. They know they can't afford this. They know it will never happen to them. So they might conclude that English is not important for their well-being because they might not work in those areas either. With this in mind, the pandemic hit. Of course, this picture over here is just an illustration because my students, they don't have laptops on their own. They don't have their own personal computers. They only have their smartphones as their only digital learning tool. And it's not the bleeding edge tech-equipped smartphones either. So it's been a struggle in the early onset of the pandemic when the government announced the school lockdown last year on March. In March to June 2020, I was just trying to tie loose ends. As other teachers in my school, the mode is take-home assignments. So every other week, parents had to take assignments from school, and students would spend a week working on the practice and project while consulting with their teachers via chat lines in WhatsApp group. But the new year, academic year came and the pandemic wasn't over yet. So I had to figure out to find the tool that worked best for my classroom setting. We had tried Google Classroom, Google Meet, Zoom, quizzes, chat lines, audio explanation via voice notes in WhatsApp app, but we resorted back to take-home assignments because most of my students, they couldn't complete the assignments online. That was disappointing and disheartening. But recently on January and June, I was settling down with presentation slides, using PPT slides, and audio explanation, and most importantly, individual feedback. So this on the chart is the typical learning process in my classroom, especially starting on July, on the new academic year this year. I was starting to feel hopeful because I can use Telegram as my tool to work with my students, voice chats, and there is also group voice conference. So on Mondays, my students will have the pre-recorded videos that I posted on YouTube with explanation and examples for the topic of the week. And then they can consult with me via chat lines in Telegram on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and on Thursdays. I'm going to gather up my students on a small group discussion using Telegram in a group voice conference. So this is how we look like, I'm trying to keep my students engaged. So I would group them in small groups based on their ability, their effort, and punctuality in submitting the assignments, or in their response, responding to the practice and project from the video explanation in YouTube. So typically in my class of 20 students, I would divide them in groups of 4 or groups of 3. So I would have 5 to 7 sessions in a day, teaching and syncing up the topic that they have learned individually during the first 3 days in the week on Thursdays via Telegram group voice chat. By keeping the group small, I believe that I can reach them individually, and then if needed, I would give more individualized and personalized feedback via voice note or chat lines to their personal number. This was by far, at least according to Lee, is very basic and rudimentary use of technology to make sure online learning going. But this is the point. You don't have to use the most advanced, the most sophisticated use of tools, of digital tool to make sure learning happen. You use what works for your classroom setting. And fortunately, the government here starting last September announced that we can have a face-to-face meeting, albeit limited. So we only have 60 minutes a week on a face-to-face meeting with our students, so that I can have the opportunity to sync up what they have learned before class begins. So it's a flipped classroom setting with limited face-to-face meeting. With that in mind, I have some points to ponder. That technology is a tool. So you create the solution. In my case, I had to figure out which tool worked best, which is the most suitable tool, not the most advanced, not the latest, but the most suitable to my setting. Because even when I had to read on SITREPS, digital learning landscape analysis in Indonesia, and how we can have learning from home during pandemic, in the end, my situation is unique to you and to your student. Because finally, what we have to keep in mind is that we want to keep our student engaged. That's the main concern. Because lest we forget, the center of educational process is the human relationship between a student and a teacher. You might think that it's between you and your class, but essentially, it's between you and a student, singular. So, the rapport, the relationship between you and one student, each and every student in your classroom, is the main concern of educational process. That way, you can make sure your students are engaged, actively seeking ways of connecting, associating together the various components of learning. This can be done if you know your students in person, in small groups, in personalized, individualized, differentiated, immediate feedback that you give to your student. We're back at this notion that the default mode is crisis. Probably I have solved the crisis of building relationship with my students, because after 3 months of not meeting me, or more than 3 months for the 8th and 9th graders. When they finally had the chance to meet in person, in face-to-face meeting setting, they are not too shy, they're not reluctant to express themselves, to show that they have learned the things they should learn during the studying from home, learning from home setting. That crisis may seem over, but the pandemic may be over soon. Let's hope for that. And then everything would go normal. But is the crisis over? I sure hope not. I would like to think that it would be better for us teachers if anywhere in the world the default mode should be crisis. Because the moment we think we have no problem with our learning process, the moment we think there is no problem with our students, there's no problem with the way we teach, that's the end of progress. So by keeping at constant awareness that we are in a crisis, we would seek solutions. We would seek better ways. We would adapt a more flexible, personalized learning for our students. We can have more possibilities. And when we collaborate with other teachers, we will have ample choices. We have plethora of learning strategies to be practiced in our own setting. Only on the brink that people find the will to change. Only at the precipice do we evolve. If we think we are safe, if we think we are okay, everything is fine, we're not going anywhere. So by this, I would like to propose that the default mode is crisis, not just in rural area, but anywhere in the world. We have to be at constant awareness that we're in trouble. Good luck.